close your eyes, not later, right now. I want you to smell something that has not existed in 40 years. Coffee at 6 in the morning, the percolator on the counter, your mother already standing in a kitchen you will never walk into again. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. You didn't wake up to an alarm in 1965. You woke up to that percolator. You could hear it through the wall of your bedroom before the sun came through the curtains. That slow, bubbling sound started soft and got louder until the whole house smelled like Maxwell House or Folgers or whatever your mother bought at the A&P that week. It did not matter what brand it was because it all smelled the same to you. It smelled like the day was about to start, whether you wanted it to or not. And somewhere in the kitchen, your mother was already dressed, already moving, already doing things you would not understand for another 50 years. She was up before anyone. That's the part you did not know when you were 8 years old and you do not fully understand even now. She was up at 5:30 or sometimes 5, and the house was still dark. She moved through it without turning on the hallway light because she knew where every wall and every door frame was by feel. The first thing she did was fill that percolator with cold water, scoop the grounds into the basket, set it on the burner, and light the flame. Then she stood there in the quiet of a house where everyone she loved was still sleeping, and she waited for the coffee. For just those few minutes, the kitchen was hers alone. By the time your father sat down at the table, the bacon was already done. You could smell it from your bedroom, that sharp, salty smoke that cut through everything. You knew she was standing at the stove with a fork in one hand, turning the strips in a cast iron skillet that was older than you were. The skillet had never seen the inside of a dishwasher because there was no dishwasher. The grease popped. She did not flinch because she had been burned so many times that her forearms had small white marks she never mentioned and you never asked about them. The toast came up from the toaster and she buttered it while it was still hot enough to melt the butter in 3 seconds. The eggs went into the same pan where the bacon had been because she never wasted a clean pan when there was still flavor left in the one she was using. Your father ate his breakfast, drank his coffee, and kissed her on the forehead, or maybe he did not. Then the front door closed. His car started in the driveway, and she was already making your breakfast before the engine noise faded down the street. Your breakfast was different from his. It was cream of wheat with a pat of butter melting in the center, or oatmeal with brown sugar that you stirred until it turned into a warm, sweet paste, or 2 pieces of toast with Welch's grape jelly spread so thick it turned the bread purple. You sat at the table in the kitchen, and the morning light came through the window above the sink. It hit the linoleum floor at an angle that made the whole room feel golden. The milk was cold from the glass bottle that the milkman had left on the porch sometime before dawn, and your mother stood at the counter packing your lunch in a brown paper bag while you ate. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper so tight the corners were folded like an envelope, an apple, sometimes a napkin with your name on it in her handwriting. She did not sit down. You realize now that she almost never sat down during a meal. She ate standing at the counter, or she ate after everyone else had left the table and the food was cold, or sometimes she did not eat at all, and you never once asked her why because you were 7 years old and you thought that was just how mothers were. You thought every woman in the world stood while her family sat and ate last if she ate at all, and it would take you 50 years to understand what that meant. The best moment of every weekday happened before you even reached the kitchen. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the school bus dropped you at the corner, or you walked home from school with your jacket tied around your waist and your books under your arm, and you came up the front walk and you opened the door and the smell told you everything. You did not need to see the stove or hear a pot boiling or ask what was for dinner because the house answered for you the second that door swung open. If the air was thick with fried onions, it was meatloaf night and there was nothing to worry about. If it smelled like garlic and tomato, it was spaghetti and you might get seconds. If there was a heavy, warm sweetness in the hallway, it meant she had been baking and there were cookies on a wire rack on the counter and you were going to get 2 of them before dinner if you were quiet about it. And if the house smelled like chicken broth, low and rich and golden, it meant someone had been sick, or the weather had turned cold, or she just felt like making the one thing that could fix anything. And you sat at the kitchen table doing your homework and the steam from the pot rose behind you and fogged the window over the sink, and neither of you said a word because the kitchen was doing all the talking. She might have put her hand on the top of your head as she passed behind you, a touch so light and so quick you barely felt it, but you knew she was there and you knew you were home, and those 2 things were the same thing. 5 o'clock was her hour, not yours, not your father's. That kitchen between 5 and 6 in the evening belonged entirely to your mother, and she moved through it the way a mechanic moves through a garage, with purpose and certainty and hands that knew exactly where every utensil was without looking. The Crisco came out of the cabinet, and a spoonful of it went into the skillet, and the onions went in after that, and the sound they made when they hit the hot fat was the opening note of a symphony that played out every single evening of your childhood. The potatoes were peeling themselves under her knife, long curls of skin dropping into the sink, and the pot was already boiling on the back burner before the last potato was done. She salted the water without measuring because she had never measured anything in her life, and everything she made tasted exactly right every single time. You have spent the last 40 years trying to figure out how she did that, and you still don't know. She cooked with her back toward you. You saw her shoulders, her apron strings, the back of her hair, and her elbows moving. You sat at the table or leaned against the door frame and you watched her. She knew you were there without turning around because mothers always know. Sometimes she handed you something over her shoulder without looking, a carrot end, a piece of raw potato, or a cherry tomato from the garden. You ate it, and it tasted like nothing you have ever tasted since because it came from her hand in her kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday. That meant nothing at the time and means everything now. The table was set by 6. Your father's chair at one end, your mother's chair closest to the stove because she was always getting up for something. The salt that someone forgot, the bread that was still warming, the butter dish that hadn't made it from the counter. Your chair was where your chair always was because nobody ever sat in a different seat. You could not imagine sitting in a different seat. The idea would have seemed as strange as sleeping in someone else's bed. The food came to the table in serving dishes that your mother had gotten as wedding presents and that you will find in a box someday in a closet. You will hold one up and turn it over and look at the bottom, and you won't know what to do with it, and you won't be able to throw it away either. Everyone bowed their heads. Someone said grace. It might have been your father, or it might have been you. Then the dishes started moving around the table, and you took the mashed potatoes and the green beans that you didn't want and the meatloaf that you did. The entire family was in one room at one time, eating the same food from the same stove and talking about the same day. No one was looking at a screen because there were no screens, and no one was somewhere else because there was nowhere else any of you would rather be. After dinner, your mother filled the sink. There was no button to push, no machine to load. She filled it with water as hot as she could stand, and she squeezed Joy dishwashing liquid into the stream, that lemon yellow soap in the white plastic bottle with the red cap. The suds rose, and the steam rose, and the kitchen windows fogged over so thick you could draw your initials in the glass with your finger. She washed and you dried, or your sister dried, or your father dried on the nights he felt like helping. The plates went back in the cabinet one at a time, the silverware went back in the drawer, and the pots went back under the stove. The kitchen was clean by 7:30, The counters were wiped, the dish towel was draped over the faucet, and the light over the sink was the last light on in the house before everyone went to bed. The smell in the kitchen after dinner was different from the smell during dinner. Quieter somehow, soap and warm water, and the faint trace of whatever she had cooked still hanging in the air, mixing with the lemon of the dish soap and the dampness of the cloth she used to wipe the table. The kitchen in that moment felt like a room that had just finished doing something important and was resting now, breathing out, settling into the dark. And she did this 7 nights a week for 20 years, and she never once called it work. Saturday was different. Saturday was the day the kitchen smelled like heaven had opened its doors and was using your mother's oven. She pulled the Sunbeam Mixmaster out from behind the bread box and plugged it in, and you heard those beaters start spinning, that high metallic whine that meant cake batter or cookie dough or pie crust. The flour came out and the sugar came out and the vanilla extract came out. When she opened that tiny brown bottle of vanilla, the smell hit you from across the room, sweet and dark and complicated, and it mixed with the butter that was softening on the counter, and the cinnamon she shook from the tin, and the brown sugar she packed into the measuring cup with the back of a spoon. The kitchen turned into a bakery that no bakery in the world could match. Because the woman baking was your mother, and she was making these for you, specifically for you, not for a customer, not for a profit, but because it was Saturday and you were her child, and this was what Saturday meant. And when the beaters came out of the bowl, she held one out to you and you took it, and you licked the raw batter off the metal with your tongue, chocolate or vanilla or peanut butter or whatever it was that week. The eggs in the batter were raw, and nobody cared and nobody got sick, and the taste of that batter was so much better than whatever came out of the oven that you would have been perfectly happy if she had never turned the oven on at all. Sunday was the day the kitchen started in the morning and did not stop until dark. She put the roast in the oven before church, or she started the chicken before anyone was dressed, and when you came home from services, the whole house smelled like a restaurant that only served one family. The table got its extra leaf pulled out from the closet. The chairs that normally sat against the wall were brought to the table. Your aunt and uncle came. Your cousins came, your grandmother came, and she sat in the chair closest to the window and she watched your mother cook. She nodded or she did not nod, and either way, your mother kept moving. The food came out in waves. The roast first, then the potatoes, then the gravy that she made in the same pan the roast had been in, scraping the bottom with a wooden spoon and adding flour and milk and stirring until it thickened into something so perfect that grown men took seconds without asking. The talk around that table was loud and overlapping, and someone told a story about someone else and everyone laughed. Your mother was still in the kitchen bringing out the rolls and the butter and the cranberry sauce that came from a can and held the shape of the can on the plate, and nobody thought that was strange. And then there was Thanksgiving, the one day a year when the kitchen started at 4 in the morning and didn't rest until the last plate was dried at 9 at night. Your mother was up in the dark. The turkey was still cold from the refrigerator. She lifted it into the roasting pan with both hands, rubbed butter across the skin, slid it into the oven, and closed the door. For the next 6 hours, that bird filled the house with a smell so deep, warm, and layered that it settled into the curtains, the upholstery, and the coats hanging in the hallway closet. When you went to bed that night, you could still smell it on your pillowcase. It was the last thing you breathed before you fell asleep. The kitchen that day was a factory. The counter was covered in flour. There were 3 pots on every burner. The oven timer went off and nobody could find the pot holder. Your mother grabbed the pan with a folded dish towel and pulled it out without hesitation. The pumpkin pie sat on the counter cooling, and the whipped cream was in a bowl in the refrigerator, the real kind she made with sugar and vanilla, not the can, never the can. You stood in the doorway and watched the chaos. Your mother moved through it like she was born for exactly this moment, because she was. There was also the kitchen at night after everyone had gone to bed, and this is the part you never saw. You were asleep down the hall, and your mother was standing at the counter in her housecoat under the light above the sink, the only light on in the house. She might be writing a grocery list or wiping down a counter she had already wiped, or just standing there with a cup of tea. The house was quiet and the kitchen was quiet, and she was alone with the kitchen she had given more hours to than any other room in her life. Sometimes she sat down finally in the chair that was hers. She drank that tea and looked at nothing in particular. Whatever she was thinking about, she never told anyone, and no one ever thought to ask. There were things in that kitchen that you have forgotten and things you will never forget. The clock on the wall above the stove ticked so loud at night you could hear it from the hallway. The wall calendar from the hardware store or the insurance man showed pictures of covered bridges or autumn trees, and your mother's handwriting filled the squares with dentist, PTA, birthday, anniversary. The cookie jar on the counter was never empty. The salt and pepper shakers were shaped like little chefs, or little roosters, or little ears of corn. The pot holders she crocheted herself from cotton loops on a metal frame were thick and stiff and always hung from the drawer handle near the oven. A magnetized knife rack sat above the sink. The window above the stove opened in the summer to let the heat out and closed in the winter to keep the heat in. The radio on the counter played softly while she worked, sometimes music, sometimes a talk show, sometimes the news, and she listened while her hands kept moving because her hands never stopped moving. You left that kitchen, you graduated from high school, and you left for college, or for the military, or for a job in another state, or for a girl who lived 2 towns over. On the day you left, your mother stood at the door and she hugged you. She might have cried, or she might have held it together, because that's what she did. She held things together. You walked to the car, you drove away, and you did not look back at the house. You were 19 years old. The entire world was in front of you, and it never occurred to you that you were leaving the only place on earth where someone would ever cook for you like that again. You didn't say goodbye to the kitchen. You didn't stand in the doorway for one last look at the counter, the stove, the window, and the clock. You just left. The kitchen stayed where it was, waiting for you to come home for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for a weekend visit. Every time you walked back through that door, the smell was there. The same smell, the same woman, the same love, translated into cornbread, pot roast, and apple pie. Every time you left again, and every time it got a little easier to leave, that is the part you regret now. Years later, the kitchen changed. She remodeled it, or your father remodeled it, or they sold the house and moved to something smaller. The linoleum was replaced, the curtains were taken down, the percolator was unplugged for the last time, stored in a cabinet, and eventually given away or thrown out. The mix master went quiet. The cast iron skillet ended up at a yard sale for $2 and a stranger bought it, never knowing that it had cooked 10,000 meals for a family that loved each other, even when they did not know how to say it. You have tried to cook her food. You have stood in your own kitchen, in your own house, with your own stove, and you have followed a recipe you found written in her handwriting on an index card stained with something you cannot identify anymore. You did everything exactly the way she wrote it, the same temperature, the same ingredients, the same timing, and it did not taste the same. It was close, it was good, but it was not hers. Something was missing, and you could not find it no matter how many times you tried. The thing that was missing was not an ingredient or a technique. The thing that was missing was her, standing at that stove, in that kitchen, in that house, on that street, in that year when everything was still whole, when nobody had moved away, when nobody had gotten sick, and the family still fit around one table. The kitchen you grew up in does not exist anymore. Not the way it was. The stove where she stood is gone. The counter where she rolled the dough is gone. The table where you sat with your elbows too close to your brother's plate is gone. The chair closest to the stove where she barely had time to sit is gone. She is gone. But here is what I need you to understand, and I need you to understand it today, because today is Mother's Day, and there is something your mother gave you that she did not know she was giving and that you did not know you were receiving. She gave you a room, not a bedroom or a living room, but a kitchen, the only room in the house where all 5 senses worked at once. You could smell the onions, hear the boiling water, feel the warm plate in your hands, see her standing at the stove, and taste what she had made for you. That room lives inside you right now, every inch of it. The wall color, the floor pattern, the cabinet handles, the sound of that percolator, all of it is still there, stored in a part of your brain that nothing can erase, not time, not distance, not age, not loss. So close your eyes one more time, take one more breath, go back to that kitchen, the one with the warm light, the fogged windows, the radio playing softly, and the woman standing at the stove with her back to you, her hands moving across pots she knew by touch, and meals she made by heart. She is still there. She will always be there. And the door was never locked. Happy Mother's Day. If you can still smell her kitchen, leave a comment and tell me what she was cooking. She would want you to remember.